happening in Tigray, but we just thought we'd show you a short video, which the Tigray Youth Network have made themselves. And then we'll go into a Q&A, some questions, a bit of a discussion between Melat and Natalie, and then we'll have a bit of time for Q&A at the end. So yeah, if you do have any questions, just post them in the chat. Ria will collect them, but we might we'll hopefully have the time that you might be able to ask your question and turn your mic off. So yeah, Ria, if you wouldn't mind showing this video made by the TYN.
Disturbing videos which appear to show the killing of unarmed civilians in northern Ethiopia by people apparently dressed in Ethiopian army uniforms.
First, Ethiopia's Amhara regions denied that its forces have been systematically massacring communities in the northern region of Tigray.
These women aren't just part of a conflict to push the Tigrayans off the land. This is about erasing Tigray and the Tigrayan identity and the Tigrayan bloodline, which is one of the hallmarks of genocide.
Women are facing widespread sexual violence at the hands of these forces. Abiy Ahmed, stop the lies! Abiy Ahmed, stop the lies! Stop the genocide in Tigray!
Stop the genocide in Tigray!
Eritrean troops out of Tigray! Eritrean troops out of Tigray! Raping our women! Abiy Ahmed to the ICC! Stop killing Tagaru! Stop killing Tagaru!
Thanks, Ria. Yeah, so we're going to jump in with Melat first. So yeah, could you describe a little bit about what's happening in Tigray from your point of view?
Great, thank you, Hope. Thank you for having us on here on this platform. It's great for us to be able to, like I said earlier, amplify the voices that we have been trying to amplify for the last 6 months. The current crisis in Tigray being the northern state within Ethiopia, is a state-sponsored genocide, as we have said it has been since the very beginning. This is because the people of Tigray are being targeted all over Ethiopia, not just in Tigray, but even outside of Tigray, merely for exercising their democratic rights, as well as for their ethnic background. What we have seen is, since the 4th of November, we have seen consistent aerial bombardments by regional and national and international forces. Whereas this is, through aerial bombardments, some of them through extrajudicial killings and through targeting of civilians by, through using means of starvation and rape as a means of warfare also. So it's from our perspective and from what we are, from what the international community is concluding to now after 6 months of observation and concern, is that this is the targeting of the people of Tigray. This is because this doesn't solely, it's not confined to the region Tigray, but it is also in like Ethiopia, all over the country. In Addis Ababa, they are being purged out of roles in which they hold within the Ethiopian Airlines, within the African Union. So this is something that's even has extended being just in Tigray. The people are facing mass starvation. So our population is one of the smallest population within the from all the other ethnic groups within the Ethiopia. There are around 7.5 million. And from all of those people, over half of those people, 4.5 million, have now been pronounced to be at risk of mass starvation. You know, one of the reasons why we keep saying genocide is if you are putting 4.5 million, over half of a certain ethnic group's population at risk, that by default leads to means of genocide. And if you are also using means such as removing, ethnically cleansing people out of their land, if you are looting their property, destroying their property, destroying crops so that they are not, the farmers are not able to harvest and grow the much needed food that, you know, they have been fending and using for the last however many years to get by, it's the hallmarks of genocide. And these people had already been facing food insecurity because of the locust infestation that they had been going through before the war had started. So it's almost a really bad situation that has been really like you know, worsened because of the current genocidal campaign, the state-sponsored genocidal campaign against the people of Tigray. So that is the context with what's happening. The involvement of the actors that are involved in the crisis are ethnically motivated, as also expansionists or people that had long-standing land issues with the people of Tigray or within the border. There's the neighboring country of Eritrea, who has fully been brought into this war, and you know, we've seen the denial many times from the central government in Ethiopia as well as the Eritrean administration. However, you know, this is something we have again been saying since the beginning of November, but it has taken this long for the US and for the UK very recently as well to outwardly express that Eritrea should not be within the borders of Tigray and that they need to immediately leave. One of the obstacles or one of the issues with Eritrea or of a foreign country with such long-standing animosity with the people of Tigray or with the elected government of Tigray, regional government of Tigray, sorry, is the fact that there is an element of vengeance in the way the troops are operating within Tigray. There is an element of premeditated kind of hate, and that's because of again, I go back to the long-standing issue that they've had with the regional government of Tigray. So the people are unfortunately having to be faced with this you know, premeditated vengeance, that kind of animosity, and that's, you know, that's what's leading to so much rape, sexual violence, and with just execution of like young men and people with just the ethnic Tigrayan identity. So yeah, that is that. And also I must add that a lot of their property has been looted. So it's you know, the emergency right now, of course, is the humanitarian aspect of things in the sense that these people need food, that, you know, starvation is being used as a mechanism. However, it's even the future, this is creating a generational problem where the looting is going to really affect the region for a very long time. I mean, 80% of the region's health facilities are completely inaccessible. They're completely destroyed. Our educational facilities are destroyed. They are being used as sanctuaries for IDPs. So a lot of the infrastructure as well as the social structure of Tigray has been completely destroyed by this war.
Thanks so much, Melat. That was so comprehensive. And if you follow the Tigray on their social channels, they share so much information, even sort of information coming out of Tigray, which is you know, continually updating on the situation, which is really hard from our media point of view. So yeah, I was going to ask you, Natalie, about whether you think the crisis is being taken seriously enough by the international community. I mean, it's been sort of compared to a Rwanda, and from your point of view, do you think it's been recognised on the scale that Melat's described?
I think, first of all, I want to say thank you very much to Melat for that presentation and the whole network, because, of course, it's a really difficult thing to do, to talk about these things when, it's your relatives, your community. So, I think we really need to acknowledge that. And I also think it's important, perhaps, since this is a young Greens and Greens of colour meeting, to sort of go back a little and think a bit about, what's unique about a Green approach to international relations, to foreign policy. And what I would say is unique is that human rights is something that all sides of politics at times use and brandish and say it's really terrible, we want to act on the human rights in this country or that country. And other parts of politics very often do that because they want to use it as a stick to beat some people they don't like, who they see as commercial rivals or political rivals or whatever. Where I would say that the Green Party is different is we say that we should actually apply those principles of human rights, the most basic of all, protection from genocide. That should be applied everywhere without fear or favour, to people who might be in other contexts your friends, or indeed, to people for whom there's not any particular, you don't, in areas of the world where you mightn't have any particular access to grind at all, but you still have a responsibility to act where there's terrible human rights suffering. And, in the context of the whole of Africa, the whole indeed of the world, the UK as a long-term, incredibly destructive colonial power that's created chaos around the world over many centuries, has a particular responsibility. We talk as Greens at the last conference, we talked a lot about reparations. So, we have a responsibility in Tigray because it is one of the immediate pressing events in the world that we need to be talking about, that we need to be acting on. And I think when I say the word acting, I think we need to be a little bit careful and draw some lines here, because, historically, occasionally, as people will well know, Britain, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq, a white saviour kind of riding in with the military, that's not what we're talking about. We know how disastrous military adventurism and how it's worked out, and the situation of that. And I also think, one of the things we have to talk about and see this as part of this context is, of course, we want to stop human rights abuses. We absolutely want to stop genocide. We want people to be able to stay safely in their own countries as their own homes, as most people in the world do. But we also, if people have to flee, we have to, as Britain, be taking our responsibility share of providing people with safe refuge, as is our obligations under the UN Geneva Convention. And, it's really important that we do as Greens all the time, talk about the hostile environment, and, say we don't want a hostile environment. We want to say refugees welcome. And those are all parts of our responsibilities in a broad kind of sense. And that's why, Tigray now is so very important. And I shared in the chat box a link. And we did have a very good report. I mean, it's rather dry and a bit technical, but nonetheless, it does show there is work being done from the Select Committee of the House of Commons and the International Development Committee. And there's a whole list there of really important and useful points, down to the point of training UK diplomats in the relevant embassies in the Horn of Africa to make sure that they know what to do, how to act, what their responsibilities are in terms of genocide and human rights and those kind of issues. There's a whole lot of things there. So this is at least part of the UK Parliament is taking action, but we're not seeing action from the government. And we need to see that action, and that means speaking out. And I think lots of the things that Melat asked for, and indeed the briefing I was on with the European Greens this afternoon, one of the things that I'd put absolutely top of the list in an immediate sense is humanitarian aid access. Lots of the humanitarian aid workers are not able to get in to help people, to provide the food supplies, to provide the medical support. And from what I'm hearing is, there has originally the Ethiopian government just stopped that happening altogether. Then they kind of allowed some kind of access under international pressure, and that's a demonstration that international pressure is a useful thing. But because there's still conflict going on, and, you know, of course, you can't send Red Cross or Red Crescent workers into situations where their lives are in danger. You know, it's just simply still not safe for lots of them to go to places where they need to go. And I think, as Melat referred to, there has to be, you know, independent investigations of what's happened. People need to be held to account. And as Melat also referred to, there's the situation with the Eritrean government, which is, you know, on the territory of another sovereign government. And my understanding is that they promised to withdraw by the end of April. Now I'm looking at the screen on my computer now and noting it's the 30th of April. And my understanding and all the information I have is that they haven't withdrawn. So, you know, that's the things that the UK government needs to be asking for. And also there needs to be a push that, you know, rather than weapons, rather than fighting, rather than abuses, there needs to be real talk, real discussion, real dialogue conducted under safe conditions that all the participants can safely take part in. So, I mean, those are some of the things that the UK government needs to be calling for. And I think just one final comment I'll make is, you sort of mentioned a little bit about my biography, and anyone who's listening who's wondering, my accent comes from Australia originally, and as well as having been a volunteer in Thailand, most of my professional life I was a journalist, and I finished as editor of The Guardian Weekly, the international edition of The Guardian. And one of the areas that, as a feminist and as someone particularly concerned about issues about sexual violence against women, I've worked for a long time, and when I was editor of The Guardian Weekly, I focused particularly on issues of the Eastern Congo, which is an area where for decades, particularly under the under when what was then known as Zaire, that's now the Congo, there was huge abuses with also lots of Western Chinese companies present, huge abuses of women, which still continue to this day. And if these situations are allowed to fester, allowed to continue, there's a real risk that, you know, violence becomes endemic. I mean, having been in Thailand, I also know that, of course, Cambodia, infamous for the killing fields, the Khmer Rouge, you know, Cambodia to this day has a particularly acute problem with violence against women, domestic violence, that comes out of a situation of violence. So the longer you allow violence to go on, the very much worse it is. And you know, I know, again, the briefing I was on this afternoon, you know, I'm usually talking about Saudi Arabia in the context of trying to stop our arms sales to them and the hideous war in Yemen. But, you know, I did hear this afternoon that Saudi Arabia is being, you know, modestly a force for good in the Horn of Africa because it doesn't really want problems more or less on its doorstep. And, you know, the Horn of Africa, there's risks of this conflict spilling over, refugees fleeing to other places, other problems arising. So, you know, it is in Britain's interests to act to help secure the world. And, you know, we've all learnt in terms of COVID-19 the phrase, you know, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And that's something we might want to think about in the context of the absolutely tragic situation in India right now. But, you know, in terms of international security and defence, and we've just had something called the integrated review of all of Britain's sort of foreign policies come out. And, you know, it has some fine words talking about, you know, we need to work for security, stability, human rights, democracy. Some of the words are quite good. But and we've got to talk also about the international development aid cuts, the government cutting from 0.7% of GNI to 0.5% of GNI in the context where our GNI has also gone down significantly. So it's a much bigger cut than that sounds. We are not going to be secure in Britain until the whole world is stable, secure. We have democracy and human rights. So, you know, if you, I'm aware of the context where, you know, a week out from the election and some people on this call might be out knocking on doors, and, you know, people will sometimes say to you, well, we've got to look after ourselves at home first, and, you know, we can't go out there around the world until we've solved our child poverty problem, whatever. And of course we need to solve our child poverty problem. But actually, we as Britons can't be secure until the whole world is secure, stable, and we have respect for human rights and democracy. So there are lots of moral arguments for doing all the kind of things I've just outlined. But even people who just don't want to accept moral arguments, there's a really strong practical argument for our own security of a much safer, more stable, secure world.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, and you've touched on a lot about what the UK can do. I know that Melat and the Tigray have sort of developed their own sort of demands for the UK government. Obviously, Natalie, you've mentioned these and covered so much just then, and that link is also really important, would be really useful. But yeah, Melat, I wonder if you could expand on your demands, but also perhaps, yeah, what the UK government can be doing, but maybe more wider than that, that what we can be doing as citizens, and part of the networks that we're part of. Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think our demands have been very consistent. They've been very uniform globally. So what I would kind of reiterate to you right now is basically what every single Tigrayan living within Tigray and within the international community will relate to you as well. And that is humanitarian access, first and foremost. So this is with no restriction. It cannot be, used or directed by the same perpetrators that we are seeking an investigation against, which is the central government of Ethiopia. And we also believe that without the exit of Eritrean troops, this humanitarian access will not be able to reach the areas in which it's needed, because it's either being looted and stolen, or it's being redirected to other regions. And this is something that other international bodies have been actually documenting and have spoken on. Additionally, it's not good enough for the Ethiopian government to describe as Tigray as a work in process, and only refer to the capital city of Melat as a reference point. Melat being in and out of the same kind of dire needs that the rest of Tigray is in. But what we have to understand is there is still no electricity all across other regions of Tigray. Other regions of Tigray have not been connected to international communities, and even in Melat, the networks are not consistent and the electricity is not consistent. There's times within the last 2-3 weeks where electricity and connection and any type of network will be gone for a week or so. So this is not consistent, or it's not good enough at all. But also the fact that the rest of Tigray has not been connected. The rest of Tigray is still unreachable. We still have families 6 months in that we actually have not spoken to. And a lot of people don't actually think, because of the fact that the Ethiopian government has used the press to kind of almost say, oh yeah, things are back to normal. Like the administration, there's a interim administration that's been put in place, which has not been voted for the people, I must add. And that in itself is problematic, because if you are not there by the choice of the people, if you are there at the choice or at the decision making of the perpetrators or the central government in this case, how are you going to be a voice for these people, who are in dire need? How are they going to not feel intimidated when approaching you for what they actually need? So that in itself is problematic. So one of the first things that we need is the reconnection and the humanitarian aid for all of Tigray. And that being said, that leads me on to our second demand, which is the exit of all invading troops. When I say invading, that is because whereas the Amhara militia are part of Ethiopia, there's still a different ethnic group that have ethnically cleansed Tigrayans from their land in Western Tigray. They have systematically moved over 352,000 people from Western Tigray into Central Tigray. And this is systematic, and it has been aided by central government, because the same group was provided with transportation for these people, for the removing of the same of the Tigrayans from their land. They had been providing with transportation, and they had been given the mandate to go ahead and do this. So again, it kind of ties us back to the chain of accountability, and it leads right up to the top, to Addis Ababa, to the central government. So again, the removal of all invading troops, including the Amhara militia, including the Eritrean troops, which I mentioned to you guys earlier, have a sense of vengeance. There's a sense of vengeance that has been come from, you know, personally, I think from the war that has happened in the 98, and they are using this to almost come into Tigray and systematically rape women, systematically loot. And this is, you know, this has been caught on camera. This is not something that we are merely, you know, suggesting, or we have no knowledge of. This has been reported on by international bodies that are still within Tigray. This has been reported with journalists, international journalists, which very recently got that access. So you have to also understand what happened before there was any access, when the blockade was still there, which it still is in most parts of Tigray. It is 10 times worse than what we are seeing now. And what is to come, we fear, is also 10 times worse than, you know, than what we have seen as well. And another demand that we also have is an all-inclusive political dialogue. And that is because of the fact that this crisis will not be solved through any other means but political dialogue. And that is because there is a mistrust, and rightly so, of central government with the people of Tigray. There is a complete cut off in communications. And well, if we are to get to the bottom of the fact that it is central government that has given the green light for Eritrean troops, for Amhara militia, and for their own troops, and has attempted to cover up all these crimes, you know, and has allowed these things to happen to the people of Tigray, you know, in a blackout. Therefore, there is a complete mistrust within the central government and with the people of Tigray. So a politically inclusive dialogue is a must with who the people of Tigray have actually elected, democratically elected in September. They need their own representation to have a politically inclusive dialogue with other parties, whereas even if that is the Amhara administration, the central government administration, and so on. And another major point, I think we were talking about this earlier, is the need for UN-led investigations. And we say UN-led specifically, focusing on the UN-led, because the approach that has been put forward right now by the Ethiopian government is the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, headed by Daniel Bagdala, to have a joint investigation with the UN. And the reason why we reject this, I think I mentioned this before, is that the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is not an independent body. It is not an independent body, first of all, because it is working with the state. So it doesn't have any checks and balances between the two. There is no separation between the two powers, and it's also it's funded by the state as well. So you can I've mentioned this earlier. You can understand why we would not want the perpetrators to be part of the body that is investigating the crimes that we have reported. And these are grievous crimes. I mean, we have seen the cover up of so many different massacres. We only learned about the Aksum massacre with the numbers and the report that Amnesty released a couple of months after the incident happened. And that is not to say that the Ethiopian Defence Force was present at that time. They were partially involved, and the Ethiopian Defence Force is directly, the commander-in-chief is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia is also aiding and funding the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. So the UN-led investigations are very vital to us because it gives us some type of accountability and justice, which is what the people deserve. And aside from that as well, like I mentioned, the humanitarian cause is dire. That's probably the most urgent thing that the people need, because this is a matter of survival. And like I said to you, for this to actually happen, we need verification that Eritrean troops and the Amhara militia, those people that are a threat to the fact that the people of Tigray can receive humanitarian access with no restrictions, must exit Tigray. So those are a couple of our demands. I didn't go into too many of them, but to the most basic ones. In terms of how the UK can cater to these demands, it's quite simple. it's using diplomacy to be able to influence change. It's, you know, I think in 2019, the Foreign Office had this strategy of the force of good strategy, where it wanted Britain to kind of be a leader in using diplomacy as well as development hand in hand to ensure security and to end instability all across the world. And that's something that Dominic Raab has really spoken about many times. And like Natalie said, we don't want these words to just be thrown about by the government, and for it not to actually be implemented when it is required. And Tigray is a key situation in which the government can actually uphold the principles that it seems to have to want to implement in such crisis. So the UK has a lot of relation with Ethiopia in terms of bilateral trade, in terms of diplomacy, and we have like a really far-fetched history as well. So the diplomacy is key, as well as using development and bilateral, economical relations to influence a lot of change in what is happening in Tigray.
Thanks, Melat. Yeah, that's really important, really good, and really clear. That's the thing. It's such a complex crisis, and it's definitely not just one solution. But we are a powerful nation on the international stage. We do have diplomatic power, as well as the development efforts that we're engaged in. And yeah, from the point of view of as a citizen, and knowing about the issue. Yes, it's sharing awareness of things on social media, talking to our friends and family about it. But our MPs are there we've got to hold them to account. So we can email them, we can tweet them, we can have Zoom calls with them to tell them how concerned we are about the issue. And we could share the video that we've just shared just now. And if anyone does want sort of like a draft like email that you can send to your MP, I'm sure the Tigray can send you one, because the crisis is so complex, and it's super hard to understand from the point of view of an MP who doesn't know the history of the crisis. So I think just hearing from their constituents, their concerned constituents, they have a voice for sure in terms of influencing, yes, the foreign secretary, voting against cuts to aid cuts. So yeah, I just add that, because we, from the point of view of the MP relation, we said we'd go into some Q&A as well. I don't know whether anyone has any questions. I don't think we've received any in the chat, but if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask anything to either Melat or Natalie, and we've also got some sort of Tigray attending in the audience as well. So great to hear from any of you, anyone else on. I guess it's such a complex issue, so maybe qualifying sort of history of things, which Melat might be able to answer, or any questions for Natalie in terms of the parliamentary side.
Perhaps just while we're waiting, I can just reflect on one thing that I think, particularly what Melat just said. I mean, the importance of the Tigrayans having their own say about their own future and having a proper place at the table. I just posted a little bit in from Green Party International Policy in the chat that talks about participatory local, regional and national institutions free to exercise political and economic self-determination. And that self-determination phrase, I mean, one of the things when I was Green Party leader, and one can of course be hit by questions from any side on any subject whatsoever, particularly when you're party leader, and that's still sometimes true today. And having been a newspaper editor of primarily international news, I've probably got more background than most people have, but you can always be blindsided by some country that you don't know a great deal about. What you can always do is go back to that principle of self-determination, which is just absolutely at the core of our political philosophy, that says, we believe in decision-making being local and only being referred upwards when absolutely necessary. And that really gives you a foundation for thinking about foreign policy. And that, you know, is a foundation about individual community autonomy, people making decisions for themselves. And that's something that's, you know, really foundational, I think really important, that to pick up from what Melat said, that, you know, that's what the Tigrayans are asking for, and that's what they should have the right to.
Yeah, and actually just before we went on, Natalie was mentioning this idea of bringing various like diaspora groups together. And I guess, as you're saying, sort of, if we're talking about self-determination for people who across the world altogether, is an interesting concept. I don't know whether you want to expand on that, or whether anyone has any questions on how that might work and how we might sort of come together to facilitate that or be part of that.
Well, I was just reflecting that I'm also co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Hong Kong, and kind of wearing that hat. We did, I think it was in January, the Young Greens did a joint meeting with young activists from Hong Kong, of course, many of whom are likely to be coming to the UK in the coming months and years. And it's always been one of my pet things, is that people are much more powerful when they get together and group together. And we see, you know, because I lived in Thailand for 5 years, you know, I'm very aware it's the young people on the streets of Thailand, you know, many of whom are often, you know, more or less the same age as many of our climate strikers are in the UK, are more or less the same age of the young Tigrayan network. Around the world, there's huge numbers of young people. And of course, one of the things that social media enables us to do is get together far more easily and organise together far more easily than ever been the case historically. And, you know, if we could have a powerful march of, you know, get together a dozen different young people groups who are based in the UK, all together saying we need a different kind of world. And, you know, maybe we could perhaps at Autumn Conference of the Green Party or something, bring together some kind of panel, and, you know, people will have different perspectives, and it's, you know, it takes quite a bit of work. People have different languages. You know, young people coming out of China will sometimes, you know, say things about communism in ways that mightn't square with how other people talk about things. And just to realize that if you get together and talk and see, you know, the self-determination, the democracy, the human rights, you know, a very basic freedom from genocide, find the agreement points, find where you can work together. And I think that's really powerful and important.
I have a question for Natalie. Just given your expertise and your experience, extensive experience, what do you think in regards to Tigrayans' advocacy efforts will be the most sustainable source of advocacy, also in terms of working collaboratively going forward with the Young Greens and other similar kind of bodies and organizations, charities? What, how do you think would be best to explore sustainable forms of activism, of advocacy, sorry?
I mean, I think one of the things is you never be afraid to reach out. And these days, you know, just sending an email is pretty easy. It's perhaps easier than it used to be. And also don't give up. I mean, you know, one of the practical things just for me is, as lots of the Young Greens on this call will attest, I sometimes just disappear under the weight of my email queue, and things may get missed, or, you know, it might take me a while to get back to you. So if you've identified someone who you think, you know, or an organization or a group that might be useful, you know, be terribly polite, terribly constructive, suggest we'd love to help you, we'd love to come to talk to you, we'd love to work with you, how can we do that? And also recognize sometimes that if you don't get a response the first time you try, it may just be someone like me who's just, you know, had one of those days where you've disappeared under the weight of the email queue. And, you know, the top 100, once you get past the first top 100 emails on Gmail, you may disappear down. So I guess what I'm saying there is persistence, polite reaching out, and also, you know, creative thinking. So maybe if you have some people, I mean, perhaps many diaspora communities tend to be focused in cities, but, you know, what local groups, and I'm thinking here, you know, there's a famous, infamous, and infamous in a good way, because they can be surprisingly political and sometimes give politicians a hard time. You know, the Women's Institute in the UK, which tends to be seen as a small c conservative, you know, rural-based organisation. But, you know, if you happen to have someone who lives in an area where there's a Women's Institute, say, hey, can we come and talk to you about the Tigray situation to the Women's Institute? And, you know, I've talked to some Women's Institute groups around the country, and, you know, by their standards, Greens are pretty radical people, but they may well be very interested. They're going to be very interested in the women's, you know, protecting women's rights, in protecting women. So look to non-obvious things as well as the obvious things, is I guess the point I'm saying. And be prepared to reach out and say, you know, can I just come and have a chat and have a coffee with you and tell you about this? And the more you can reach out into those different groups. And, you know, just while I'm here, sort of to offer the practical point, I mean, as a Green Party member of the House of Lords, when the House is sitting, which at the moment we've got about 10 days before the next Queen's speech, but once that's over, you know, I can put down 12 written questions a week to the government that I used to say they had to answer. That's not quite true. They have to provide some text in response, which is not quite the same thing. But nonetheless, you know, use your local MP. Where you live, your local MP has a responsibility to represent you. So go to your local MP, say, can you ask the government this question? Or come to me and say, you know, Natalie, can you ask the government this question? You know, reach out and realise it won't always land. But, you know, if half the things you do land and have some impact, that's a pretty good result.
I think, Lucy, did you have your hand raised? Do you have a question still? If not, Melat has hers. Yeah.
Yes, it links quite nicely actually to what Natalie just mentioned, and I've just seen, I think Elsa mentioned it in the chat. You've both talked quite a lot about how women seem to be suffering quite disproportionately. So I was wondering if maybe both of you could speak more about the gendered aspects of this crisis.
I can go. So the sexual violence in Tigray has exceeded, I think, a lot of what we had initially imagined before the blackout. Just was, you know, was some sort of, there was some type of communication created. The reason for this is that it is not being documented. And the reason why it's not being documented, again, relays back to the fact that the perpetrators are still, you know, intimidating the victims. So they're forget receiving justice, that these victims do not even feel that they are able to come and actually approach any type of authority, because it is the authorities that are the perpetrators. Because the gang rape and the rape and the, you know, all this sexual violence that they are being exposed to is at the hands of the troops that are in their land. So it's at the hands of Ethiopian forces or Eritrean forces. So if these are the authorities that you are told to go and report or, you know, your victim account or give your account to, and you know you will be discredited, first of all. Secondly, you know you and your family will be intimidated, because these numbers are being really confined so that the international community is not able to hear of the horrors of what these women are going through. Because what that does is, you know, is horrify people, and people start to demand that justice is served, right? So, you know, it goes hand in hand to the fact that there is a blockage of communication as well. The numbers are really downplayed. Even now, a lot of the safe houses, a lot of the kind of service that these women, the rape victims, are the victims of sexual violence, should be getting, you know, they're in fact, they're being redirected. They're being redirected because the government really wants to decrease the numbers. And that is because of the whole political side of things. But, you know, at the heart of this is that these women are not able to have any type of healing, or there is no type of healing process, and there is no type of justice. And you also have to think of the fact that even in terms of medical care, if our medical facilities, if 80% of our medical facilities have been looted and have been destroyed, the chances of these women getting any type of medical kind of care is very minimal. And some of these women cannot walk days on days, you know, they have physical kind of implications, you know, when it comes to sexual violence, and they're not able to walk for days on days when there's no transportation, there's no electricity, there's no family members there, you know, to walk to any hospital. So the main hospital being in the capital in Melat, they're not able to walk that far for days to actually receive the service that they require. Additionally, like, one of the biggest aspects of the sexual violence is also the fact that these women are being infected with with sexually transmitted diseases by a lot of these troops, some of them being untreatable. So we're talking about things like HIV, and some of them there's unwanted pregnancies that they cannot even terminate. I mean, just the other day there was a report done by Channel 4 where, you know, they were speaking on the fact that they don't even have enough facilities to deal with the termination of pregnancies after the incident of rape. So the horrors of the sexual violence, I think it's not the tip of it's literally not, it hasn't touched a small aspect of what we know will definitely come out in the you know, in the years to come or the months to come. But again, you know, it's really for these NGOs or these organizations that have the protection of women, you know, at heart, you know, to actually amplify what these women are going through and to ask for investigations to be done in a way where it doesn't discount victim account or it doesn't gaslight the victims, because we have seen time and time again that is what the administration, the Ethiopian administration, has been doing. So because our very own Prime Minister has sat in Parliament and discounted the numbers when it came to rape victims. You know, he has sat in Parliament and said, you know, that's just a small aspect of what comes with conflict. He has discounted what these women are going through, and at any point, at any, you know, during any conflict, it should not be a normalcy for women to go through any type of sexual violence or rape when it comes to any manner of conflict or any political conflict or military conflict.
Yeah. And just to add to that, perhaps, I was listening to a Chatham House, which is an international relations think tank, seminar this week on Tigray. And one of the, I think it was an NGO speaker, and that was saying, you know, there were 900 documented rape cases. And when you think about the situation, what's happening in Tigray, and knowing that that's a tip of the iceberg, that's a tiny fraction of what's actually happened. You know, 900 is a huge number for that many to have been able to be reported. And I think there's two things to say about this. You know, one is what Melat was saying. If people, men, know that they can do this without real fear of being prosecuted, you know, the sort of the phrase often used for this is impunity. If there's a culture of impunity, people can get away and not be punished. You know, some people will do that. But I think there's also a broader sort of international cultural aspect to look at this, which is, you know, we have a global military culture that is, you know, we have a global culture that is profoundly misogynist, but the militaries tend to be particularly bad, and that culture, you know, encourages rape and violence against women. And actually, just in the past week, there's been quite a bit of coverage, and this is not just particularly relevant to Tigray, but there's some really good evidence. I think it was the anniversary of women starting to work as UN peacekeepers around the world, and there's really good evidence, documented, peer-reviewed academic evidence, that women peacekeepers, particularly when you can get significant numbers of them into a war zone, make a really, really big difference to how everyone behaves, to how much safer women and children feel, to how much more you can start to tackle that culture of impunity. So you know, there's a whole broad, big issue to address, and you know, this is as true of the British military as many others, is if you start to think about what are you going to do about military culture, what are you going to have a sense, you know, who are you going to send as peacekeepers, what's that situation, that's a much bigger and broader issue to address. So I think impunity and military cultures are two of the big answers to that question.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, we did have a few questions in the chat just about, you know, what can the UK government do, and we sort of touched on this earlier, so you may have joined later, but I wonder if Natalie, you could sort of sum up in a couple of minutes what you think of the sort of priorities and what we can be doing for UK government, and then Melat, if you can reflect on anything that you think is kind of most important as concluding remarks.
Sure, yes. No, we should let people go on a Friday night, but we did start about a couple of minutes late, so that kind of works. I note I haven't had a chance to read all of the comments. There's quite a lot of words there, but I did notice the reference to sanctions. And I think one of the, exciting things and really encouraging things that's happened in international affairs recently is we've seen the development of what are known somewhat slightly difficult to pronounce as Magnitsky-style sanctions. And I was actually on a seminar with the All-Party Parliamentary Group in Hong Kong, hearing from Bill Browder, who essentially is the one-man person who helped to campaign to get those starting up around the world. And the name Magnitsky comes from a lawyer who was working for Bill Browder in Russia, and who was essentially persecuted by the Russian state and essentially killed in jail by the Russian state. And what Magnitsky-style sanctions are they are sanctions that can be targeted at an individual person within a country for their individual actions. And just to sort of build in a little bit of history of that, if you go back 10 or 20 years, we often had sanctions against whole countries. And if we go back to Iraq, perhaps before the Iraq War, the whole country was sanctioned over what Saddam Hussein was or allegedly was doing. And that meant then that, medicines didn't get in. And so children, utterly innocent children, didn't have access to medicines they needed. Sanctions blocked off lots of essential supplies for people, and the whole country suffered. Magnitsky sanctions, which excitingly is something that have arisen from community campaigning, from people getting behind Bill Browder and his campaign and driving forward, is a way in which you can not penalise a whole community, a whole country, a whole society, but pick out individuals and say, if you're the general who oversaw this genocide or sent those troops in and they did all of those things, we will target you as an individual. And the kind of things that does is says, we will freeze any assets you have in foreign countries. We will stop you traveling around most of the world. So that's something that there's obviously possibilities that this is something that could be applied in Tigray. And, the British government has employed, I haven't quite kept up with the latest number, there's about for sort of humanitarian war crimes things, I think there's about 25 or 30, some of which apply to the Uyghurs in China, some of which are in Tibet, I think, and there's a few others around the world, some Russians. And actually just last week we had the first ones applied for corruption as well. So this is a real fast growing and really quite encouraging area. And there's, I think, possibilities to apply this in Tigray.
Thank you. We do actually have, I know we started a little bit late, so we could take one more question because it'd be good to hear from the floor. Sorry, I think you got your email address, so I can't see your name, but if you do have a quick question, and then Melat can sort of draw it together in her concluding remarks. Is that a hand raised? Might be an accidental hand. I can ask you to unmute, I think. No problem. It might be an accidental hand. Yeah. All right, Melat, yeah, just kick us off with your final remark.
So I would like to give a big thank you to the London Young Greens, to the Green Party for for being able to work with the Tigray Youth Network. Hope you attended our march as well and you gave your speech, and we were very grateful for that. And we are grateful for the fact that you are, using your platform to amplify what we have been advocating for the last 6 months. So, that's we do have a lot of gratitude towards the London Young Greens. I do feel, however, that the UK government in general needs to do a lot more, and that is because the UK is a beacon of hope and it's a beacon of leadership for a lot of countries all across the world. So we are leaders in terms of foreign policy, in terms of human rights, and if the reason the fact that we had left the EU, so one of the aspects of why they campaigned to leave the EU was to take back foreign policy, and if you can't take foreign policy when it comes, if you can't take back foreign policy when it comes to such crisis like the Tigray crisis and the genocidal campaign that is going on in Tigray, where human rights abuse and violations are very evident for you to see, then we have to ask ourselves as the British people, what do we really believe? What are the norms and values of the British society as a whole? And is the government, you know, are they adhering to what the British people want in terms of making sure our human rights, you know, our values when it comes to human rights are being upheld in such crisis or within our foreign policy? Again, like Natalie said, it's very easy to keep referring back to, you know, the Britain being the force of good, and to actually talk about this and using development and diplomacy. But what are the, you know, what is the groundwork behind this, behind these principles? What are the British government doing in making sure that that whole region is, you know, the instability is stopped as soon as possible? Because when you think about it, this instability will cause us as the British people, you know, issues that are going to last for decades as well, because you have to think about the refugee numbers rising, the refugee coming into the EU and into the UK, because if these regions are not stable and they are not able to live in peace and security, and they don't have food security, or they've got you know, a political conflict that is, you know, what is currently going on, that is not able to be solved through a politically inclusive dialogue, then it's going to have a rippling effect on a lot of the international community. And this is not just the EU, but within the UK as well. So I think the UK government really needs to make sure that Tigray climbs up on the list of priorities. And I also think this idea of condemnation is a bit outdated. I think it would have been great if the condemnation had happened in the, you know, December or November, a month or two after all these human rights violations, after maybe the amnesty report, or, you know, such things. But, you know, it's come quite late. But even that, you know, I want to take that with a pinch of salt, and I want to make sure that we can move towards a solution-based outcome for this. And the solution-based outcome is for the people that, you know, of Britain, or the people who have MPs that represent them, for you, where, you know, you can be an ally to Tigray. You don't have to be from a certain region to be an ally for human rights. And I think it's about time that people actually bring this to the forefront of, you know, what they regard is a precedent that should be, you know, all across the world when it comes to human rights. And we need to make sure we are pestering our MPs so that they know the importance of making sure that they are supporting any type of action when it comes to, when it comes to economical targeted sanctions. Again, like Natalie said, targeted sanctions are best to achieve a lot of results instead of sanctions on a whole nation. So this is for the British government to see what suits them and what is able to achieve the greater results. But this is, you know, this is what we must do, not just Tigrayans, but because, like you said, you know, when there's instability somewhere, it's going to reflect back on international states as well. So what we need to do as people who are, you know, the British people, the British society that believes in the core values, norms and values of the British society, which is, you know, to uphold human rights internationally. We were, you know, Britain was one of the greatest empires of the world, and one of the reasons why, you know, they were able to kind of keep that going for so long is because of their history of diplomacy. So that history of diplomacy should be used in matters when there's a lot of human costs as well, which is what we are currently going through. So that is what I would like to finish off with the fact that our demands should be amplified in the House of Commons, and not just amplified for condemnation, but amplified for action to be taken.
Thank you so much, Melat. Yeah, and thanks everyone for coming. So on behalf of the London Young Greens, thank you so much. Ria, do you have any sort of final thanks or comments?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Hope for organising a lot of this, for Melat for coming and kind of speaking, and Natalie as well. Thank you so much. It's been a really kind of enlightening conversation, I think, and hopefully more people are made aware about the situation in Tigray and more action can be taken in the future.
Yeah, and Ria shared some links in the chat as well to follow and keep in touch with the TYN. Thanks everyone so much.